Greetings and welcome to the LHE Global Festival 2020. We're coming together from a load of different countries, a load of different folks. You've seen the schedule for the week, so I'm really happy you saw this session as being one you're interested in joining, and hopefully you'll get a good time out of it. You've maybe been to some sessions earlier in the week as well, and there's a couple more tomorrow. There's more tomorrow and on Friday as well. Today, the next hour or so, I'm going to cover what we call remit mapping. It's a process we came up with a couple of years ago that emerged from a whole bunch of stuff around people. It's not so much around what people do, but about people themselves. So the heart of this is our people and the staff, and like I say, they're just what is your team doing now is about the people and the dynamic around that and how you can support people and help them be successful in what they do. So I'm Michael Sinnott. I'm a director of Agile in UCD, which is a small strategic change initiative. And the Agile in our title is Agile of the human sense as opposed to the software sense. And I'm joined as co-pilot today by Jeremy Britton, who is the project manager for a rollout of what we call the unified support model, and it's working through school and college offices across the campus around how you do a more integrated and joined up mechanism to support the direct services provided to staff and students. And in both of our areas, there's a narrow remit that created Agile, for instance, which was to do, or narrowish, to do with bringing, helping the university deliver excellence, helping build capabilities and supporting a continuous improvement culture. So we have three things around value and excellence, around capability development, and around the community side of things and the culture of continuous improvement. And that means while we were responsible for bringing in Lean and Lean Six Sigma by and large into the university environment, our brief tends to go broader than that, because in the end, what we're looking for are mechanisms by which people can build value and excellence, they can develop their capabilities, and they get supported in doing that. So that allows us kind of a flexible brief around that as long as we're achieving those outcomes. So we're going to talk about remit mapping today, but just first a quickie on Lean HE. Like I said to somebody just a second ago, I had the pleasure last year of being in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when Lean HE had its annual conference there. I found my way there because somebody I happen to know in this broad space said, you should go to the Lean HE conference, they're really good folks. And what you'll find in this kind of space, both within, I know within our own institution and more globally, is that people connect up and you get to know people, and they tend to be people you can turn to if you want some wisdom or some insight or something like that to support you in what you're doing. While all our institutions may be different in their detail, the challenges we face as individuals in trying to do good stuff in them can be quite common, and so you get a lot of that in coming together around Lean HE. And out of the Ann Arbor, out of a breakfast, a European Lean HE regional committee breakfast, which sounds quite impressive, but it was mostly bagels and sour cream, came an opportunity. Somebody said to me, would I sit on the European Regional Committee for Lean HE and look to begin this more broadly in Ireland? So at this stage, I've contacted with University College Cork, Dublin City University, and Queen's University in Belfast, and we're going to look to see if we can build that Island of Ireland regional cluster for Lean HE. So that's the kind of thing that happens when you get involved with enthusiastic and interested people, is you tend to get sucked into it. So that's one of the great things about Lean HE. Just to give you a quickie for those of you who don't know Dublin, the numbers there on the right hand side give you a sense of our scale. The photograph tells you kind of where we are. We're a parkland campus about 4 kilometres outside the city centre in Dublin. That's a photograph taken on a sunny day. If you were there now, the leaves would be somewhat browner, but our autumn hasn't really taken full swing yet. But what you would see that's the same then as it is now is there aren't many people on campus at the moment. We've gone back into a more significant level of lockdown, and at this stage there is still some teaching on campus taking place, and indeed my secret shopper, my son who's in 3rd engineering, is in there today for a lab, but there's very little on campus teaching going on at the moment. There is postgraduate stuff, research is still taking place, and we've got a bunch of folks who live in accommodation on campus, and so they're all there. So that's kind of going on the campus at the moment. If you want to think of what size are we compared to your institution, we've about 30,000 students on campus in Dublin. There's about 33,500 overall. We graduate about 9,500 students a year, which is, I think, probably just under 5,000 undergrads and 4,500 postgrads, something like that, one way or the other. Those are the numbers. 30% of our students are international, 30% of our staff are international. That kind of gives you a flavor of our campus and who we are as an institution. Another thing to mention to you now, and you'll see this symbol on all the pages, we have a community of practice in UCD called Work Smarter Together. UCD Agile, my unit, supports it and sponsors it because it's a great aspect of that culture of continuous improvement in the university. But the great thing about Work Smarter Together is it predates UCD Agile. It began in 2011 and 2012 when a bunch of folks came together and said, let's have some way of celebrating the collaboration and creativity that makes what we do here work so well. And so that community is something that we nurture and we support, and it's got a bunch of activities that go alongside it. And indeed, every year in October, we have an October event, and there are 2 sessions for that event on tomorrow, 2 Work Smarter Together sessions, one of which Jeremy is leading tomorrow, overlaps with the Lean Higher Education Global Festival. So Jeremy will be working with a crowd of about, this stage, I think there's about 170 signed up for between the international audience and the in-house audience tomorrow for a session at 2:30 as well. So we have our own internal inspiration for Lean Higher Education too. So enough of the introductions. To the meat of what we'll cover today. So I'll cover the concepts behind remit mapping, the mechanics of remit mapping in the tool, how you can use that, and a little bit at the end on the approach to when you bring it into action. And the reason I'm not doing that much on the approach and how you bring it into action is when you do remit mapping, it tends to be very contextualized by why you're doing it for a given bunch of folks. So talking about all of the different ways it can be used would be an exhaustive list and wouldn't give you the flavor of what it's like to work with a given group. So I'll give you some stuff on that, but really today's session is about enticing you to make use of this technique yourself with some of your own folks. And when you make use of it, you'll get a feel for how it works, because it's in the end incredibly simple. Despite the fact that I'm going to spend an hour telling you the theory of it, it's incredibly simple, and it's something that you best get the feel from when you use it. And it's aimed at being able to give you the answer to that question, just what is your team doing now? It's a fact-based statement about this is what's happening. And so that's what we're going to look at over the next short while. So there's 2 kind of real reasons that I ask, where are we now? And they break down into the first one there, which is often in institutions where things work quite well and they roll from year to year. That clarity around just what we're doing and why and how it fits into the big picture can fade out. And that can be a challenge. When you ask people to do stuff, they don't necessarily have the full picture about why they're doing it. And that can happen because if there's no crisis and there's no major change, then doing things as they've always been done is a good way of working. And you don't need to talk too much about clarity and purpose in that situation. But it does mean when people need clarity and purpose, it hasn't been a recent conversation. So I've seen plenty of examples of that. And as a manager of a unit, at different times I've been responsible for not providing clarity. And the other one is, this may be your example, it may not be, lots of change journeys happen without any real clear understanding of where we're leaving from. So we're going off on this wonderful change journey. The world is going to be a better place when we're finished all of the work we're about to do. But there's no real clear understanding of where we're leaving from, what it is we're actually addressing, how the future is connected to the present by some meaningful way. So we head off and do all of this great work, but not necessarily in relation to a clear understanding of where we're coming from. So talking about clear understandings, before we get too far into the session, I'm going to ask for a bit of input from you guys. So just in terms of yourselves and your own teams, we're going to do a survey now, and you get about a minute to respond to it. So plenty of zippy stuff. 2 questions. The first of which is, for those outside your team, how clearly do they understand what your team's purpose and activity is? And I mean your whole team. I don't mean just the bits they touch on. How many people and how broadly outside your own area is what you do understood, both in terms of why you do it and the activity? And then the flip side of that is, within your own team, could all of the members give a clear breakdown of all of what you do and why you do it? And I'm using all in there. In other words, it's not about bits of understanding, but everybody who works in your team give a clear breakdown of what your team does and why you do it. And some of you will be in teams with high turnovers of staff, and so the answer is going to be no, because there's always a turnover. But that's what I'm asking you. You see, those two questions, those outside your team, how clearly do they understand you? And those inside your team, could they all give a clear breakdown of what you do and why you do it? So there's going to be a minute, and you're going to, and this is not a scientific survey. You'll see some of the answers to the questions are a little bit on the quirky side. So choose whichever one best fits you, and we'll have a look at the answers then when you get your time to do it. So about a minute in total for the two questions. Jeremy, can you open it up, please?
Opened.
Okay, folks, so get stuck into the questions and the answers. So another 10 seconds. Okay, Jeremy, we'll close it now. So can you share the results? Okay, so outside your team, how well are you understood by them? And on that first question, you can see that mostly well understood is about 20%. We have 40% on confusion and assumptions, and then there's a 24% on they don't have a clue apart from what they need us for. I don't have an opinion as to what the best answer is, but confusion and assumptions is probably not great, but it is a reflection of the reality of a lot of what we deal with. So that's an interesting picture there. Mostly well understood is great, and they don't have a clue apart from what they need us for. We don't focus on how we're understood, we just provide a good service. I kind of like that one personally. Sometimes you'll hear people talking about, well, nobody really understands us, but if you're providing them with the service they need, perhaps they don't need to understand you. And then within your team, what we've got is, there's quite an even spread here, maybe, but we're very individual as 21%. Most folks could, but we have some new staff, and no, it's a pity we can't do it, but no, and yes, everyone is clear on what we do and why. So that's quite an even spread between those four answers. Then we've got it's a small team, so it's not an issue. And then there's somebody out there, it's just me. It's great that the person who's just me isn't suffering any confusion as to what they do. That's a great characteristic to have in that. And we don't need to worry, we work hard and get the work done. So that's an interesting mixture anyway across those two areas, as to those two results, as to what your experiences are. And I'm not sure if we can do it, but we'll copy those results into the presentation so you can see it afterwards. Okay, so that's an interesting picture. On with the presentation then. So in remit mapping, there's three basic concepts I work off here, and at the heart of them all really is that first one there, and it's to do with Dan Pink's stuff that he produces around the idea of how do you help people have intrinsic motivation and perform well. So how do you give people a good working environment where they do good stuff? And at the heart of that for him is the mastery and autonomy and purpose. Some of you will have come across this and won't be new to you, but at the heart of his idea that if you want to help people be well motivated, an intrinsic motivation of their own, and to be in a high performing environment, then the three key elements of it are mastery, autonomy and purpose. And for me, linked to purpose in our university environment is that purposes evolve over time. And depending on how you manage that evolution, it'll either still be a clear purpose or it'll have got fuzzy. And then slightly unconnected to those, they overlap on the now bit, is a key concept is we need to know where we are now before we head on a journey. So mastery, autonomy, and purpose is focused on purpose. Purpose evolves over time and can become a bit fuzzy, and we need to know where we are now before we head on a journey. They're the three concepts in what we're about to do. And so if there was one thing you took away from today's session, it would be to go and watch that 10-minute Dan Pink YouTube video. It's one of those cartoon ones you can see there from the top right hand corner, where they draw the cartoon as he does his 10-minute spiel. It's a really interesting take on mastery, autonomy, and purpose. It leads you into the book if you like that kind of thing. But if there was one thing you were going to do that was going to root you in some of what I'm talking about now, it would be to check more into that video. So in it, he talks about mastery, and mastery is not one of those step things where I don't have a skill, I do something, and now I have a skill. It's a 1 or a 0. Mastery is not a 1 or a 0 thing. It's about that sense of being drawn forward. Now, all of us have got friends who are really good at cooking, and you go along and you say, God, you're a really good cook, and all that's going through their mind are all of the things that weren't good about what they did just now and how they could do it better, and how they could actually, they're not that good at doing pastry stuff, but they love doing chocolate or whatever it might be. And it's that sense. Mastery is that drawing you forward into becoming more, having more skills, seeking excellence for its own sake, because you actually enjoy building that skill set. And that's what Dan Pink is talking about around mastery, an environment in which people can be drawn forward and grow like that. The autonomy, and by the way, before I talk about autonomy, I decided that rather than getting caught in stereotypes, I will treat all administrators in higher education as to be balding men in their 50s with beards and glasses. So if that stereotype doesn't match you, then that's to do with stereotypes. So autonomy is about the desire to be able to direct our own life and our own work. And in a work environment, it's as true as in a life environment. And what I do, when I do it, who I do it with, people need that capacity to drive themselves when they're in their home environment. That's what that cartoon image from the Dan Pink video is about, is that you find your own way to incentivize yourself, and that's where autonomy kicks in. And perhaps the biggest one, the most important one, is the purpose one. What am I going for that's bigger than just the task I'm doing today? What's the greater goal I'm going for? How do I align the things that are important to me about how I do my job and why I do my job with the institutional side of things? I mean, many of you will be working in staff-facing or student-facing services, particularly student-facing situations. When you're that close to students, it's very easy to have a clear sense of what your purpose is. You're there to help students engage with their program, to do the good stuff they need to do, to deal with their issues, to smooth their path. If you're working with researchers, it'll be the same. How do I help them do what they're here for, which is to get the research done? Or how do I help my academic colleagues teach? Or if you're an academic in a class, how do I help the students engage with the content? That clarity of purpose is key. And what it brings us to is the first concept, which is that idea that there's a team of us, we have a clear purpose, and I'll go into Remit in a second. We have a clear set of things we are responsible for, and we have the autonomy to carry out our job to get that done well, and let us away with it now. We have the skills we need and we can build them. We know why we're doing it, and we have the autonomy to get on with it. And that maps too onto the typical administrator, where for me as a person, I want to have that opportunity to develop myself and my skills and the things that I'm interested in within my job. And I know why I'm doing it around purpose, and I have the freedom to get on with it. And all of us in different ways will have that kind of autonomy. Some of our roles give us a lot of that and some of them don't, but how do you maximize it in a given situation? So that's that first concept of how mastery, autonomy, and purpose fits in. The second concept is that purpose gets fuzzy over time. There's a crisis and everybody knows what they're doing today, or there's a new unit has just been launched and everybody knows what the new unit is about. But over time, that context and that purpose will evolve and can become fuzzier. And if we believe that mastery, autonomy, and purpose are key to high-performing teams and motivation, and we've just said purpose has become fuzzy, and when we say purpose can become fuzzy, it means we're saying performance might drop and motivation and clarity can be an issue there. So where are we now in relation to who we thought we were? How did we get here? Where are we going? That's all questions that come up around what happens to that clarity of purpose and where you're going. So that's the second concept. And then we're on to this journey question. So when I talk about a journey, I mean any kind of change. We've all been through journeys in the last while, change journeys arising from COVID-19, or you might be putting in a new system, or your staff changes, or any of the things that involve a journey from some now to some future state, and we've gone along those. Anyone who's worked in lean knows that from the as is to the to be, we all go on those journeys. And the risk in higher education, which is in our environment, which is concept 3, is if you want to get to where you want to go, be careful you know where you're starting from. So if you're heading off to the beach to sit under a sun parasol and enjoy the sunset as it happens, you need to be pretty sure you know where you're leaving from, or else you're going to hit a brick wall somewhere along the way or crash over a cliff. The same is true with change journeys in the university. If you're not sure where you're leaving from and you head out the door, like if I said to all of you, get up from your desks now, go down to the front door of your building, take a left, walk for 2 miles, take a right, and then I'm there waiting for you. That's not going to happen. Instructions about how to get to the future, which don't root themselves in where you are now, are doomed. If you head out on a journey and you don't know where you're leaving from, you're lost already. And that's a concept of why we want to know the answer to where am I now? So those are the 2 now questions. As seen in what we do and don't do, how has our purpose evolved? What is it now in practice, and is our what and our why clear? So if you don't have a clear sense of purpose of what you're doing and why you're doing it, then that's a challenge. And as you head out on your change journey, have we some kind of clear analysis or assessment of our current situation? And underpinning both of those is the sense that if you don't have clarity and a clear sense of purpose, then you're in a challenge situation. You're not going to be able to perform as well as you could, and your colleagues are not going to be able to thrive and be as motivated as they could be. So as a lot of the remit mapping, when we talk about what people do, can sound like it's focused on the people who do the doing. It's actually heavily focused on the managers, because a manager's job in the end is to create an environment in which their staff can thrive and do a good job. So remit mapping, oddly enough, puts most pressure on managers to do a good job rather than the staff within a given area. So that's something to think about around how we can answer both those questions. So that's the why we asked the question in the first place. The next section I'm going to go on to is what are the elements of a remit map. There's the basic concept as the concept of the evolution of remit, and then there's the map elements themselves. So to start off with remit, my remit is basically the stuff I'm responsible for. I've been given a formal responsibility to do this stuff. And then sometimes over time you take responsibilities and other ones end up on your desk. But basically remit is the stuff I'm responsible for doing, formally given to me. And it's got a number of elements in there. You've got the boundary around it. This is the kind of formal description of what I'm doing. You've got the green bit in the middle, which is the bit where I'm free to carry out my job the way I see. I use my skills, I use my wisdom, my insight. I can do that. I don't need to check with anybody. I'm left to get on with that bit. And then the red bit in the middle is where, still inside your responsibility boundary, but you need sign-offs, or you need to discuss it with your team, or you need your line manager to agree to something. And there's some shared accountability in there where you can't just do it because you think it's a good idea. You need to get some sign-off. So you've got a clear boundary around your remit. I'm responsible for all of this. The bit in the middle I can get on with and I don't need to check with anybody. And then I've got that accountability zone where I need to plug into the environment around me a bit more before I progress with something. And that's true for either an individual or for a team. So the clarity of purpose thing that remit gives you is, this is what I do. This is the black box that says this is what I do. And hopefully what you have as well in order to thrive is, this is why I do it and this is how it contributes to the overall. Because if all you've got is what you do, you tend to look down at the desk and go clocking away. So you need the clarity that the remit will give you, and then you've got the other bits and pieces. So there's the idea of a clear remit. So next survey. How long is it since the last time your team's remit was formally set and defined and named? And I mean formally. I don't mean we sat down over a cup of coffee and said, listen, this is what we do. I mean some kind of process where you sat down and at the end of it, yes, this is formally what we do. In some cases, you may be a team of one. It's still a question of when that was defined. And if you run a team, it's the team underneath you I'm thinking about, not the team of your peers, for instance. So we're going to do a quick survey here. We'll give you 30 seconds to do this one. And what we're looking for is how long is it since the last time you formally set your remit or defined it or named it. Jeremy, away.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay, another 6 or 7 seconds. Okay, we'll close the poll now. Thanks. So can you share the results?
Yep.
There we go. Okay, so we have, so a quarter of you have been through that kind of formal process in the last 6 months, and a quarter of you have never done it. And that's an interesting contrast across the two of those timeframes. And some of you have done it, and in fact, if you look at it like that, that's what 35, 45%, nearly half have done it in the last year since the beginning of between the end of 19 and early 20, and then in the last 6 months. But a quarter of folks there haven't had the opportunity to go through formally defining their remit, which means they're probably always having to reset it and recheck it. That can be one of the challenges you face. So this is the kind of environment we're in. We've got nobody here who's as far back as 2016, 17, and we've 4% that are back in 2016 or before 2016. So there's quite a variety there as to when it was done. But what I'm interested in really is the fact that there's a quarter that have never been through the process. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So where we're going to go on to now is looking at one of the elements of the remit mapping that you will talk to the attendees at a session with you about, just to give them a context. And the reason you give them some of these ideas is so that they can start to more consciously navigate in the environment they're in at the moment. And so one of the things you see around remit is in most cases, remit is something you're given by the hierarchy you're in, at least to some extent. And so there's an institutional context for remit that comes down the hierarchy in strategic plans, or in how you're organized, or in some form of divvying out of work. You also get the things like operational plans, wherein the strategic plan is turned into something specific in a given year. The operational plans can set your remit. One of the more complex things in the university is running assessment. A whole bunch of different folks fit into how that is done, and that determines the responsibilities for certain areas quite clearly. And what you see in that too is individual job descriptions can be part of your remit, but it's more likely to be roles you have in a team that will set it as well. But perhaps the biggest one that influences people in a university environment is the things we do. A lot of what happens in the university, and all of our universities are going to be old institutions, is a lot of the stuff we do is what we did last year, plus whatever tweaks are needed from last year to this year, and that works quite well. But it means there's quite a momentum of the things we do that people have to absorb into their remit, and those things aren't always, excuse me, aren't always conscious. You can have somebody in the hierarchy having a brilliant idea around a great new plan with almost no awareness of the volume and scale of the things we do that have to be taken into account in doing it well. So there's sort of three pressures in that kind of environment, all of which are shaping and reshaping your remit over time. And one of the challenges that gives rise to then is what we had was the nice clear remit we started out with, but there are lots of things that create risks to that clarity, and I've just named a few of them here. But one of them can be that one there. Number one is defining the boundary in the first place. Sometimes you'll sit down with a boss, and the boss says, "You're doing a great job. We're really, really happy you're doing it. It's wonderful to see the great stuff you're doing. Get on with now, and I'll see you again next year." and they don't really have a clear understanding of what you're doing, and therefore a clear understanding of how you fit into the bigger picture. So you've got a fuzzy boundary around it. You get people, the unpredictable demands and the leaks coming in. You know, you've been given a particular area of responsibility, but your boss comes along and says, well, actually, I've asked somebody else to do it. And by the way, could you do this? And then there's these little bits and pieces flicking in and out of your remit, or you get the micromanaging. And I think micromanaging is often a sign that the person who's asked you to do something doesn't really know what they want you to do. So they have to keep on checking. And then when they see what you're doing, they go, actually, I didn't want you to do that. I want you to do that. And you get that risk around fuzziness around the boundary. Your remit's not always recognized by others. You say, I don't do that. And they go, oh, yeah, of course you do that. Or you say, listen, this is my area of responsibility. And they go, no, I do that kind of stuff. And you get that kind of energy lost around it. And an interesting one is the one tag number 5 there. Sometimes you'll have folks who don't want to take the responsibility and autonomy that their role demands of them, and that can be a challenge for the individual if they've been given more than they're comfortable with, or with the team lead who's looking for more than the person is comfortable with. Or you can have the opposite, where somebody expands their sense of what their freedom is so greatly that it causes confusion around it, around their role and how they carry it out. But the reason for highlighting this is this kind of model lets you have a conversation with somebody around remit, or to discuss it with a team. And so it becomes a way of having a dialogue which helps somebody go from the left to the right, from some kind of fuzzy remit responsibility thing into a more structured one. And ideally then you have the conversation which says, in delivering on my remit, I want that mastery, autonomy and purpose that's going to enable me be motivated, committed, and help the team successfully deliver. And the risk, there was a colleague of mine who used to have conniptions and be quite put out by the concept of autonomy. It was seen as a threat to everything. All we hold dear is threatened by the idea of autonomy. But autonomy fits in the context of the clearly defined remit and the boundary around that remit, meaning you know whether it's working or not. So autonomy is not a threat if you've got a nicely defined remit. Autonomy is a terrible threat if you've no idea what they should be doing. So that's an interesting dynamic that can crop up around that. So now we're going into the mechanics. I'll go through these because they fit together quite easily. And just to let you know, if you ever run a session with folks, it takes you about 35 or 40 minutes the first time you do it to go through all the theory, and then they get stuck in. And I've never needed to go back and explain the ideas to folks because they stick quite quickly. So when you're talking about remit, you've got the remit you were given at the start. You've got added remit that's put on over time, formally added to what you're doing, or formally taken away. You've got the hidden remit, and hidden remit often, I've seen hidden remit crop up a lot over the years, where somebody, say in an area, is quite good at doing interesting reports. And they become known as a person you can go to who does interesting reports. And suddenly they find themselves spending a quarter of their time doing reports for folks, none of which is formally in their remit, but they're actually really valuable. And then it turns out when you become aware of this, they've been doing it for a year. They're a key part of a whole bunch of businesses. They really enjoy it. The hidden remit is often the stuff people do that they enjoy, that they kind of keep from the boss. But it can get picked up over time, and it becomes part of how your team puts its time and energy in. The other thing in the remit is the stuff that's coming your way. So you're sitting here in October and you know that there's a big policy change that's going to have an impact on operations taking effect in the new year, and you're going to be responsible for some of it. It's coming your way. It's not there yet, but it's coming your way. The other one you have is the remit on the long finger. You know, we should be doing that. We should be auditing the whatever it might be, but we just didn't get around to it for the last 4 years. And so you've got the stuff on the long finger that's not getting done, but is formally your responsibility. Then you've got the kind of messy stuff where people assume it's your job, but it isn't. There was somebody I was talking to at one stage, and she ended up becoming the catering manager in effect for a school, because she helped a couple of people out who were running evening sessions for academic reasons, for academic presentations, and she started doing the catering for that. And then somebody else went, she's doing the catering, and suddenly it turned out to be taking up a whole chunk of her time. Was never part of it at all, but the people assumed she'd do it. You've also got the challenge of assumptions that you want to live with and assumptions you want to reject. So we'll look at that in a second in a bit more detail. So what you get are the 6 elements of your remit: the formal remit, the stuff that's been formally added, the hidden stuff, the stuff in waiting, the stuff in the long finger, and the assumed stuff. And that's your remit map. So that's the idea, that's the basic idea of it. And what you do in a remit mapping session is you get your gang to populate that map. It's as simple as that in the end. So the method around running it is the thing to bear in mind for any of you thinking you're doing this is it's a workshop. So it takes the skills you'd normally use for any kind of workshopping you do, and you apply them to this about setting it up well, about making sure everybody knows how to participate, and all of the good things you do when you want to run an effective workshop. If you've not run many workshops before, then that's the second thing you're picking up. You'll be picking up the skills around how do you do remit mapping, and you've got the question of how do I run an effective workshop. That's not a big thing, but it is a skill you need to learn, or a skill you deploy in this context. And then the other side to it, there's a key thing around working with this is clarifying the context. Why are you actually, why does the person want to do the remit mapping, and how are they going to use it? That context is key. When you get down to the practical side of it, you've got the where will we do it, and in our case in UC Agile we have, but we don't use obviously these days, a big workshop space that we can use for doing this, and it has about 100 square meters of writable walls, and it's an ideal place for bringing people in because it looks different, it feels different, and you've got lots of scope for doing that kind of work with stickies and markers and post-its and all of those kinds of things. A space we haven't yet used for doing remit mapping, but which is well set for it, is Mural, that online collaboration environment. We use it for lots of things in workshop mode. We just haven't used it for this yet, and that's something well worth exploring if you haven't come across it before, but you're used to doing workshops with folks. It's a great way to do it. How long does a remit mapping workshop take? If it's the first time you're doing it and you need to bring them through the theory, probably a couple of hours. You may find yourself wanting to spend longer than that, and certainly if you're in an online world, you wouldn't spend longer than that. But at the beginning, you need to give them some of the ideas. Once they've got the ideas, you don't need to go through that again, and it can be quicker to reuse it the second or third time you do it. The attendees don't need any preparations because they're already the experts. They're the experts in what they do, and that's a key part of remit mapping, is that what you're doing is they know what they do. Nobody knows better than they do what they do, and so they're the experts, and that's a key part of what you do when you bring them together, is to recognize that. And on the last point around the method, we never translate the post-its and the workshop session into documents, and there's, apart from laziness and the amount of time it takes, the real reason is that when you've got lots of post-its and work done by folks in a session, they've got their own handwriting, and they have that memory of ownership of where they put it and how they clustered it and the name they gave that cluster of things. And so there's a whole ownership thing you get around the work people do themselves directly that you don't have if you turn it into some antiseptic and clinical document. So the visual side of this is quite a key part, as well as the content that's on it. So the essence of a session really in the end is the stuff over on the right. The essence of the essence is you're giving people a voice on what's really important to them, the stuff they do as their day job. And you want to respect that in the way you run the session and the way you facilitate it. So that's a key thing around it. They're the experts, you're asking for their voice in it, and then you need to create an environment that respects and captures that. In terms of workshopping, you've got the usual thing around creating a space in which people can confidently feel free to participate. You'll be doing it in a workshopping mode that they probably haven't seen before, so you'll get them, that'll bring them more into the session than something that they're familiar with. What's key to you as a facilitator and key to them as participants is curiosity. And you'll find that the nature of the workshop and the approach you take triggers people going, I'm not too sure what this is about or how this is going to work. So you'll get a curiosity around the session out of that. And then the last one around running the session is that idea of control. If you're facilitating a session, you want to make sure it runs well. But possibly the most important aspect of that is the permission one. And that's permission for you to be a facilitator and to work with people in a way you mightn't do if it was in the normal day-to-day job. So it's a style to facilitating that's quite important there. When you bring them into a session, you'll bring them through the theory, but the heart of that is that recognition and the genuine belief that they're the experts. And the other side of that is the session is just about the facts of now. You don't tend to get into any judgment around whether it's good or bad. They're just describing the facts of where it is, and that's a key point too, because that's very neutral. It's not a criticism built in there, it's just a recording of facts. Here's a broad, unless you've got if I was looking at this, I'd have to squint at my laptop, but you'll see it in the presentation. This is the basic structure of a session. You start with the hellos, you give them the context, you bring them through the idea of remit, you talk about what the map looks like, then you get them to do their post-its of what they're going to put up on the map. Then they place it on the map on the wall. You bring it into some clusters for the first time and take a photograph of it. You then recategorize it. That's where the fun starts, around how you categorize and how you name those categories. You take a photo again when you're finished all of that, and that's your picture of the now. That's the first snap you'll take of an articulated picture of the now. So when you're running a workshop, this is, if for those of you who notice it, there's a sort of black line there over to the right near the tent and the finger, and that's actually a crack in the wall in the room that we work in. This is a photo from the wall in a workshop I did earlier this year. And so I tend to bring them through it in this way. I don't use a PowerPoint presentation around what the theory is. You kind of draw it as a narrative, and you bring them into the unfolding idea as you do it, and give them their background that way. Like I say, I've never found the need to go back and explain it again. And then while they're doing their post-its, you go on and draw the outline on the wall of the various segments. And then at some point when they're finished their post-its, you may have to encourage them and all of those things, they go up and post them on the wall in the various segments. And then the fun starts when you go to the next bit, where you start moving them around. And if you notice this, there's a whole bunch of stuff down in the hidden box there. And when we finished the conversation, it turned out most of what was in the hidden box was actually part of the remit that they were working out of, was just how they were looking at it. But there were two items down there that were still in question as to whether they should be done or not by the unit. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff you can see up in the upper left where there were people assuming it was their remit and it wasn't. And so with that particular group, there was an issue for them around expectations of what they would do that they were never going to meet. It wasn't part of their remit, but they needed to do something out of this session around managing those expectations. And for the eagle-eyed of you, you may notice that the number of things on the long finger didn't change. The other thing you may notice there up near the tent is we do a lot. One of the things you can see from this map, even at this high level, is how many different boxes there were in it. This is a team that has a lot of different activities, and that may be leading to confusion for the team itself, or not confusion, but a lack of focus, or for those who look to them. So that's the beginning of the next stage of a conversation as to what do we do with the insights we've gained. But as a simple thing, these are the facts of what they do at the moment. The follow-up depends on the brief. So why did they set out to do this kind of work in the first place leads you to what you might draw out of the map at the end. And that's why I said I won't go into the mechanics too much of putting it in context, because each session will be different from that point of view, because it'll have a different context. So the follow-up is very much part of your client brief when you meet with them for the first time, or if you're doing it for your own team, being really clear yourself how you're going to use this. The approach and action, just give you a quick comments on these areas. Who can you use it with? Basically anyone would be a good answer to this. You can obviously use it with your team. Often it can be the case that it's easier to facilitate somebody else, or indeed if you've somebody in your own environment where you know they're good at facilitating, getting them to facilitate can be a help when you're doing it, because there's a skill around facilitation that not everybody is comfortable with using. And so that's a key thing. The facilitator, if you're doing it with your own team, you need to be able to step back, not from your own agenda, into that idea of giving your team their voice and letting them describe what they do, as opposed to having your own agenda. That's why at least at the start, sometimes doing it for somebody else can be quite useful. You can use the concepts here with yourself to check out if you find yourself really busy and lots of stuff has accumulated. This is a way of sifting it to see just which bits belong to your former responsibilities and which bits don't. And it's something that can be used as well with your staff, especially and sometimes if you're looking at somebody who wants to be able to step back from what they do, but hasn't quite figured out how to disaggregate all the bits of what they do so that they can focus on their role or what they would like their role to become. This can be a way of helping them do it. And you can do it for the full remit of a unit, or for a business area, or for whatever it might be, depending on the scale that you do it with. you'll go into more levels of detail or not. So I suppose the largest group I've done it with is probably about 16, and it's like with most things like this, the number of people is down to the mechanics of how well you can facilitate and how easy it is to manage it. The idea obviously is scalable, but the mechanics of running a session may not be. So that's who you can do it with. The then what is the most important one for me, I think, is what we said, that, you know, you can be heading out on a journey. So the remit mapping is the pause before you head somewhere, and there can be anywhere you might go. On that, one of the sessions we did as a group of people began with the idea that they wanted to better be able to communicate what they did. It turned into something else after that, but they were planning to do communications around their unit. That P4G there is our internal performance management framework, or you can use it as a baseline from which you start a strategy journey. You can do prioritizing of anything you might want to do in this. You can do it as a way of highlighting process issues. And then you can do it as a way of deciding where you might put the focus on dealing with process issues, or if you're into a digitalization journey, where would we best gain benefits from digitalizing a process. So it lets you have those conversations all based on a neutral fact-based picture of now. For me, though, where it goes deepest is when you get back to the mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So when you look at that picture, that question we have is, how have we got clarity of purpose? Do staff have the capacity to develop mastery? How are we making sure they've got the autonomy to get on with doing a good job? And that leads you into the question of, do we need to clarify anything around the remit? And if we're looking at the remit, what's the boundaries around the remit? If it's a manager, how do I manage the team? All of those kinds of things. Ultimately, at the top there, this kind of framework gives you a framework for having dialogue and talking about stuff. If you're in an environment where we're too busy to step back and stop doing it, it starts to give you a way of having those bigger conversations and some of the concepts that can let folks have those conversations. And so that's the direction that it can be brought in. It can be both the practical one as a start for a change journey of some kind, or it can enable those deeper conversations around purpose, around clarity, around mastery, autonomy, and mastery and autonomy. So we're coming near to the end. If any folks have got questions, be sure to stick them into the Q&A if they haven't been picked up already from the chat. So as I get to the end, I guess the key thing to note is the concepts for all of how they may have been explained are really quite simple, and folks engage with them quite quickly. And I've seen skeptical crews go from skeptical to engaged, and it's not surprising a team will go to quite engaged, because they're talking about what they do every day. They know it really well, they're committed to it, and they're interested in it. So the concepts help them do that and bring them into it. A thing to bear in mind too is if you're heading on your change journey, or if you're looking at just where are we now with our clarity of purpose and how that supports staff, context is all, why are you using it, why are you doing this, and how will the insights be used, are two questions that are going to be at the back of the mind of anybody, especially if you've got a skeptical gang that come in. Why are we doing this? Why is management asking to do it? And what are they going to do with the outputs? And we've worked with a few of those, and they all have become, I would say this, wouldn't I? They've all become quite positive experiences when they see really what's going on. And at the heart of those 5 bullet points there, it's very much a teaming exercise. It's their voice, their writing, their stickies, their map. Workshopping is by definition teaming anyway. And a thing to bear in mind too is, if it's the first time that you've done it with your team, or you've done it yourself, it's going to be new to you as well. So thinking more about how do you shape that context, why are we doing it, how are we going to do it, what are we going to use the outputs for, is key to it. And then the last one there is you get good at running these sessions through running these sessions. So if part of this idea appeals to you, then do it. You may choose the scale you do it on, but the best way you'll get comfortable is through doing it. The first couple of times you do it, you'll be, as with most new things, conscious of the process. After you're familiar with the process, then you have the fun of working with people. And that's why I said at the start, this is all about people, because in the end, it really is quite interesting to work with people who are talking about stuff they care about, with a commitment to wanting to work well in that environment. And if you can help them do that, then you're doing a good day's job for yourself. So as I said at the start, this is what we were going to do. And then I think for you in the end, the 2 questions that you're looking for is, have you a clear picture of what your team is doing now? And are you better able to talk about purpose, clarity, and change? And that's what you're looking for out of that. so that's where we got to. That's what I said, I said we'd go. This is me, and this is how you can contact me. I don't bother with phone numbers anymore because I don't take phones as much. So Zoom, Teams, or chat are all good for me. So there's a question there: do different individuals use different colored post-its on the map in a workshop? Yeah, well, what'll usually happen is if you've enough colors of post-its, you'll find people use different ones. They don't have to, but you'll recognize the handwriting too. So it's quite interesting to see that side of it. They don't have to use different colored post-its. So no, they don't. But a remit map example with the presentation, the one I've shown you on there, if you get the presentation, I've intentionally blurred the text so you can't read it. The remit maps are very personal to the team, and in any area you could quickly identify which team it is. So the thing about it's difficult to see on the slides, and like I say, if you expand the slides, you won't be able to read it at all because I blurred it. I think the thing with this is to try it, because if I showed you the detail of the team that was up there, unless you work in their part of your university, it's not going to mean anything. Any other questions, Jeremy, that came up on the chat?
Just a couple of people saying it was an interesting session. My answer, by the way, on the sending out the remit map, just having done this exercise myself, I would say it's like a brainstorming session in terms of what people add and put up. There's no wrong answer, and especially when it comes to grouping, you can imagine that somebody, especially if you're asking individuals to put down what they do, they're going to write a lot of post-its. So you end up with an awful lot up on the wall. You can imagine that would go from the mundane up to the very complex, and it's in the grouping that you end up with the clearer picture of what you do. So I'd say that's the example that you've blurred out. There was all levels of work.
I had one session where at the end of it, there were about 8 folks in the room. They were working in different countries. It was the first time they'd come together as a group in quite a while. They actually made personal commitment statements at the end. So they got enough as a team that was what they wanted to do. They had the concrete detail in the remit map, but for them, the teaming bit of it was just as strong, and they made personal commitments. It was quite, I don't want to, I'm not known as a sentimental person, but it was actually quite moving to see where they got to. I did my best to hide my tears on the day, but the fact that they went that far was a great thing for them, that it meant that it worked that much for them. And like I say, I've also had the heavily skeptical gang, but because they were talking about their stuff and their team lead was there and started to take actions out of it, they got a belief in the value of the process as a way of being able to make things better and create a better working environment for themselves. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do by giving people that voice. We've come to the end of our time. Unless there are any other questions, be sure to keep an eye on LHE. We'll see what we do around LHE in Ireland and how we can make that visible. We'll continue to do Work Smarter Together in UCD. And at this point in time, and God bless anybody who's betting on it, there'll be a face-to-face conference in Glasgow next October. My personal pessimistic take on the world is the next time we can realistically hope for a predictable year is from September 22. So that's only what, at this stage, 23 months away. But LHE, the global initiative is aiming for Glasgow next year, and it'd be great if we got a chance to go and take part in it, because you get to meet a bunch of good people who are doing good things and are only too happy to share their time and energy with you. Okay, folks. Thanks on that note. Thanks very much for the day and for your time here, and hopefully you've had a chance to enjoy other sessions too.